Good afternoon. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. This is Dialogue Conspiracy number 279. It's July 25th, 1977. Last week I talked about the July rerun of the news, the Chowchilla arrest, 1 year later the suppression of the diary and the evidence, and the suppression just a year ago, this July, of the diary and the evidence. I talked about the arrest of Skid Row derelicts that were kidnapped, literally kidnapped, and put into homes that were alcoholics or drug addicts. And also a year ago in the news there was evidence that the CIA had taken these same types of derelicts for experimentation to Louisville, Kentucky, and continued to give them drugs. Didn't cure them at all. It was supposed to be a drug treatment program, but they actually continued to give them narcotics in exchange for other experiments that we'll go into later on the show today. There are many instances of the news repeating itself. Again, the Legionnaire's disease was a year ago, July, in Philadelphia, and then last week the American Legion had a convention in Nevada, and people were roused out of the Landmark Hotel, the Hughes owned Landmark Hotel in Las Vegas. Again, American Legion convention, crippled American Legion people, 900 of them, people rounded out of the hotel, including this delegation. Well, it's again time for a rerun of the assassination probes, of the John Kennedy assassination, the Watergate, Jaworski investigator coming in on the Korean story, the probing of our congressmen who've been paid off by the CIA and the Korean CIA, which is impossible to separate. And the news gets very discouraging and it gets very tiresome. People magazine, July 25th, 1977, has an article about Larry Schiller making a movie for a national television program that will be out soon, a two-part serial on Lee Harvey Oswald called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. Lawrence Schiller is a CIA journalist. There can't be any other explanation for the way he continues to cover up the truth in these assassinations, and has from the moment he got into them. He had a finger in writing about the Lenny Bruce murder, the Marilyn Monroe murder. He was in charge of the Larry Gilmore execution up in Salt Lake City. The story, Gilmore wanted to die, and Lawrence Schiller was up there with the rights to that story. He was with Jack Ruby when Jack Ruby died, with a microphone around his neck saying there was no conspiracy. While Jack Ruby was alive and kicking, he wanted to tell about the conspiracy that he played in the role with Lee Harvey Oswald, killing Lee Harvey Oswald in Texas. Larry Schiller made a commercial record on putting a microphone around Jack Ruby's neck, and that's important because Ruby was under hypnotic control of various agents of the CIA, and I'm going to talk some more about new information on the CIA and mind control. Schiller's name now comes up as important in making this new movie on Lee Harvey Oswald, and of course the conclusion will be that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty and there was no conspiracy in Dallas. The motion picture on Lee Harvey Oswald, or a new one by CBS on Oswald and Ruby, never takes in any of the information such as written in Bernard Fensterbold's new book on conspiracy or coincidence. He talks about Robert Mayu, who worked for Howard Hughes, being the link of the Hughes organization to the Central Intelligence Agency and being the link to the hiring assassination teams so that the CIA wouldn't be fingered, that would be hidden under the umbrella of the Hughes organization. And in Bernard Fensterwald's book, he has a quotation here where he said Robert Mayu briefly discussed at a trial in 1974 that he had once been assigned by Howard Hughes to have President Kennedy removed from office, and had subsequently wanted President Johnson removed from the presidency. By getting President Kennedy out of office and Johnson, then the Hughes Summa organization, the CIA, would be back with Richard Nixon, which was the intent when they first selected him years ago as a congressman. Now, these kinds of books are not used for the movies. Nobody calls Robert Mayu in Washington, D.C. before the House Committee investigating the assassinations. These are facts that are just thrown out in the wind and dropped, and it always is Oswald did it alone, where it's much more logical and reasonable now to see that the Howard Hughes organization was the umbrella for all these assassination plans, and that is the bottom line that's being protected, and that's the line that Leon Jaworski protected when he went into the Watergate prosecutions. There's an article also about Marina Oswald this week, several articles. She has 2 books coming out with Harper and Row. Priscilla Johnson is helping her get one of them out. Priscilla's brother is the one who just wrote a book about James Earl Ray being lone assassin in the Martin Luther King case. Priscilla Johnson has been identified as a CIA woman. Marina Oswald is a pathological liar, a woman whose testimony changed 40 times, who has been paid off ever since the assassinations, and nothing that she says has any basis in fact in the way she is going to frame Lee Harvey Oswald, her so-called husband. And this woman is going to take money. It'll be 14 years since the assassination, and she's been waiting to get another share of the profits of her cover story. Her citizenship, her immediate citizenship, wasn't enough, and her protection, or being married to a man in the Defense Security Command, high up in the CIA. He's supposed to be Mr. Porter. But Marina Oswald will be in the news as the woman writing about her husband, Lee Harvey Oswald, and not talking about any of the links to her, to the Argentine Nazis, to the CIA, or how she came to this country, how she got her citizenship, who provided her seclusion and isolation, protection, her dresses, her hundreds of dresses, her money, clothing, food, and she's been a bought woman since the day that she connected with Lee Harvey Oswald. Nothing in her relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald will explain the phony marriage that was set up in Minsk, Russia, where they had met, and within 3 weeks there was an engagement, but no person of her family or close friend attended the ceremony. And I've said all along that that was a CIA contract. Yet she has a book and 2 books coming out, and a lot of money will pour into her hands because this is the year to counteract the researchers again, stall the investigation in Washington, and feed through the major media, through agents of the major media, these stories continuously that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin or James Earl Ray was a lone assassin. Another man whose name is in the news this week who's retiring is Charles Bates, the FBI man who was in charge of the Patty Hearst investigation. Not only was Lawrence Schiller in a key place to write about Marilyn Monroe and Lenny Bruce and Larry Gilmore and Jack Ruby and now the Oswald movie, but Charlie Bates was in interesting positions until he retired this year. He was in London at the pinnacle of his FBI career at the time that Howard Hughes was supposed to be in London, and Hughes was not there. I don't believe they can ever prove that was Hughes and Howard Hughes in London. Charles Bates was in Chicago working with the FBI at the time the Black Panther, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were both killed, and this was part of an FBI COINTEL program. He went on to Washington, D.C. to be in charge of the Watergate investigations for at least 6 months for the FBI. Then he arrived in San Francisco on time to be in charge of any FBI purposes in the zebra killings and then in the Patty Hearst kidnapping. The collusion of the CIA and the FBI has never been openly shared or discussed, and yet Charles Bates was in all these key positions. He said he had a heart attack. He was supposed to have a heart attack. William Sullivan of Division 5 of FBI had a heart attack suddenly at the height of Watergate when his name came out as taking papers from John Ehrlichman's, putting them in John Ehrlichman's office, taking them from J. Edgar Hoover. William Sullivan's name has come through the research of the assassination as being the contact of the Defense Industry Security Command and the assassins of all these assassinations. So when his name first broke in the news, Sullivan had a heart attack and then retired. L. Patrick Gray was never prosecuted for destroying evidence at the height of the time when he was acting as director of the FBI during Watergate. He destroyed valuable evidence, deep-sixed it or burned it, and then he had a heart attack and retired. And then when the news came out of the possible links of the CIA to the Patty Hearst kidnapping, and Patty Hearst was about to get out of jail, Charlie Bates had a heart attack, and now he's retiring. He's only 57, and they've made a new ruling that the agents have to retire at this age, but I think the ruling probably is every agent who gets caught retires at that age. And then another team member is true blue as Charlie Bates or Lawrence Schiller or Marina Oswald is Leon Jaworski. And you know what I think of him. His cover-up of the Watergate was terrible. It not only was bad, but he got accolades in a best-selling book and became a big hero. And now he's come in on the investigation of the Korean CIA It's a direct conflict of interest because Leon Jaworski has been a board of directors of the CIA Anderson Foundation in Houston, Texas. He has his own front office, the Anderson Company, for surreptitious funding of a large amount of money, millions of dollars, through his own office for what he calls a cover-up. It's a surreptitious funding, $2 million front, not in Korea, but somewhere overseas, through a firm that he represents, the Anderson firm. Leon Jaworski left out of Watergate the J. Edgar Hoover murder, the killing of Mary Jo Kopechne, the Howard Hughes investigation, the shooting of George Wallace, the Mexican money washings that went to the Kennedy assassination and Watergate that could link this whole era together. So in comes Leon Jaworski now, very modest. He says, I'll do this for free. I won't take a salary. But he does get $1 million books. He wrote one on the cover-up in the Watergate, and now he can get another book after he's through with the Korean CIA investigation. Leon Jaworski first became an investigator for the United States, or well-known at the time of the Nuremberg trials. I believe it was 12 Nazis that were hung at the time. It would account for 80 million deaths in Europe due to World War II, and 12 Nazis were hung to pay their dues for 80 million, while the main Nazis got out of Germany and were spread all around the world, and many of them came to the United States. Leon Jaworski served well there, as did Supreme Court Justice Powell, who was active in the Nuremberg case, representing the United States. To be dismal some more because of the new movies coming out on national TV about the Robert Kennedy case, and as I said on 2 programs last week and the week before, the Board of Supervisors and the media are covering up continuously the evidence of the Robert Kennedy assassination, while Leon Jaworski and Lawrence Schiller and Marina Oswald will get assured bestseller books and another $1 million to continue this terrible cover-up. Another kind of cover-up is taking place, and that's in Washington, D.C. It has to do with the new chief counsel, G. Robert Blakey, who's been appointed for the House Assassination Committee. I never did have confidence in that committee. I didn't have confidence in 1975 when Mark Lane surfaced, was to move to Washington to set up a committee to open the Kennedy assassination. I didn't have confidence in them not wanting to touch the Robert Kennedy assassination, which would have been the easiest to solve. I never had confidence in Congressman Gonzalez, who first headed the committee or wanted the investigation opened because of his links to the destruction of John Connolly's clothing as evidence. And I certainly didn't like Richard Sprague because of his association for 10 years with Arlene Specter in the DA's office in Philadelphia. So after Gonzalez and Specter, we get Mr. Robert Blakey, who's directly out of the Justice Department, which is a conflict of interest. I mentioned it before on Dialogue Conspiracy, and I will be doing some more maybe next week, an interview of Mr. Blakey with the News when he took the job. But I can't see any way that committee back there will do anything but drag its feet, waste money, and then the major media will come down and say, you see, you researchers had a chance, you had $2 million, you can't come up with anything new, and they will come to the same conclusion that's inconclusive about who killed John Kennedy, and they can't find any new answers. They can't find them because they're not looking for them, and if you just have a little patience and save this tape, if you tape record Dialogue Conspiracy and play it a few years from now, you'll see that Congress will not do any progress towards finding out who killed John Kennedy, even though there's mountains of evidence to go into this particular case. So it's very tragic that this cover-up just continues at every level. The major media, Mike Douglas today had Dan Rather on talking about the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination, not admitting he covered it up, but he had a program with him on there, and Dan Rather's getting national media attention again, talking about his role in investigating the Kennedy assassination. He's going to be on Johnny Carson, and these people are patting themselves on the back, and it's so disgusting because the hard researchers are not being called. The information we have is not being used. The books, over 100 books critical of the Warren Commission report, will not be used. The authors will not be called in Washington. It is tightly controlled by a handful, a clique of small people. I call them small because they're not really good researchers. and they have a few isolated facts, and with what they have, the committee back there will never go forward. The House committee, I think, voted 12-0 to approve of Mr. Blakey, even though he was from the Justice Department, which is a direct conflict of interest because the Justice Department is suspect in these assassinations. So it isn't a very good picture. We're being barraged by Leon Jaworski, Lawrence Schiller, and Charlie Bates getting out without being pinned against the wall for the Patty Hearst case for how he covered it up. And Marina Oswald and CBS and NBC and ABC and the major media coming again like they do every few years to reinforce that story that the assassinations were done by lone assassins without the help of conspirators, in spite of the fact the evidence is otherwise, and the American people are being deceived all the time. I think it's sad. I think there's a poem I brought in that's appropriate of this situation, written by Bertolt Brecht, who was a victim of Nazi Germany, left Nazi Germany, and came to this country and studied. And he has a small poem called In Praise of Learning, learning your lessons and getting your facts and keeping up with what's happening before the next stage comes, which gets even worse. Bertolt Brecht said, "Learn the simplest things. For you, whose time has already come, it is never too late. Learn your ABCs. It is not enough, but learn them. And don't let it discourage you. Begin. You must know everything, and you must take over the leadership. Learn. Man in the asylum, you learn. Man in the prison, you learn. Wife in the kitchen, you learn. Man of 60, learn. Seek out the school, you who are homeless, and you better sharpen your wits. You who shiver and you who are hungry, reach for the book. It is a weapon. You must take over the leadership, and don't be afraid of asking. Brother, don't be won over. See for yourself. What you don't know yourself, you don't know. Add up the reckoning. It's you who must pay for it. Put your finger on each item and ask, how did this get here? Because you must take over the leadership." That's Bertolt Brecht, a victim of Nazi Germany who moved to this country. Now, along those lines, I want to spend the remaining half hour on Dialogue Conspiracy talking about some more information on the mind control, the documents of John Marks, formerly of the CIA, that he got from the Freedom of Information Act, because this is a theme that runs through almost every show that I do now on Dialogue Conspiracy. I spent a year, it was 1972 to 73, just concentrating on the area of where drugs were coming from, what the government was doing, how they were using it, how the victims were falling down, what role they had in these various conspiracies, the use of hypnosis, the use of erasing memories, and even more diabolical tests than that. It was so important. I remember the summer of 1967 when a lot of the hippies came through here. We're up at the Haight-Ashbury down at Big Sur, and they're very excited about their new experiences. They're tripping out and relating to each other, the Flower Children. And I tried to tell as many as I could, and then later on Dialogue Conspiracy through the FM stations, that it isn't enough to just have your own thing, to trip out and share and be optimistic about the future, that's okay. But be careful of the drugs that you're being poisoned with. I first met a woman who worked at the Diggers in San Francisco that told me that these people were being purposely poisoned. And that was in 1967, so by 1972 to 73, I went into it and started to study it seriously. And yesterday in the Sunday Chronicle, this is July the 24th, 1977, there's an article by a man named Thomas Bridges, and he's talking about the summer of 67. He says, June 21st, 1967 was to be the beginning of San Francisco's Summer of Love, the experiment that was to prove that the creatures that Time magazine had called dropouts with a purpose could create a harmonious and functioning community, one that would be a model for others soon to be born, a hip community that would prove to the establishment that flower power would prevail. He went on to say these kids came from middle-class white suburbia. They left schools, jobs, homes. They came west. They listened to Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors. They spread the word about the Beatles. The first FM rock station started in operation, and the Rolling Stone magazine got started. It goes on, this article in the Chronicle went on to say the population of Haight-Ashbury went to 30,000. People were sharing their housing, their food, their dope, slept in doorways, stairwells, and everything was free. But, Thomas Bridges writes, the misty San Francisco nights secluded the community of hippies in their good vibrations. Chromosome damage from LSD was a government conspiracy to prevent people from transcending to the truth. We believed everything from within the community and nothing from the outside, because there was the jingle of India bells when we walked and the smell of sweet incense when we breathed. We believed that you could break from the past and build something new on a self-created foundation. We believed words that described only what we could feel. And that was the problem with the hippies, with the generation from the 60s and now the 70s, the young people growing up who think they're really cool. They're eating their alfalfa, making their yogurt, delivering their own babies, making their macrame, doing their silk screening, whatever it is. It's a self-development theme, and taking many courses in understanding themselves, and the women working together, the men working together, the gays, the lesbians. But the point is that none of this comes together unless you understand the past. You can't break from the past. There's no way to be free if you break from the past. You have to understand the past to be free in the present. I predicted in 1970 that the hippie communes would be busted totally in the way that they were, that many people would get records for having marijuana. The purpose of these stiff penalties was to come down on certain kids while the segments of society could have all the cocaine or marijuana they wanted. The purpose was to arrest people, get jail records, and blow out their minds and poison them. Kill their musicians, discredit the musicians, get them to be freaky, and turn these people out. This is what I said was happening. I used to talk to these kids about Howard Hughes or B.B. Reboza or Richard Nixon in 1967, hitchhikers picking them up. And they'd look to me, unbelievable. It was just make your clothes, jingle your bells, and have the sweet smell of incense and turn on. And the thing that happened was that they were not into the past enough. They were too much into just the present, and that's the dangerous point. The article in this July issue of the San Francisco Chronicle is the first article that I have seen, maybe there's more, but it's the first one that has come out in the way that I've said it, in which it states chromosome damage from LSD was a government conspiracy to prevent people from transcending to the truth. And that's why Bertolt Brecht's poem is so important. No matter who you are, whether you're locked up in a special like the Garden Pavilion in Carmel, Monterey, mental hospitals, whether you're in prison now, whether you're a housewife, a mother, retired, no matter who you are, you have to be reading the newspaper. You have to be reading every day's paper and listening to stations like KLRB and the FM radio and getting the news accounts of what's happening. And as Bertolt Brecht says, you have to know what you don't know yourself, you don't know. Add up the reckoning. It's you who must pay for it. So put your finger on each item and say, how did you get here? Because you have to take over the leadership. And that goes to a news item that was read today on Dialogue Conspiracy before I came on the air, dated July 22nd, 1977 from Zodiac News, and I want to repeat it on the program today. It says an Arizona researcher who has interviewed a number of former intelligence agency employees says that the current revelations about the CIA's use of mind-controlling drugs are small potatoes compared to some of the agency's other experimental work. Central Intelligence Agency Director Stanfield Turner said last week that the CIA has found the last of the MK-Ultra drug files, which documented the agency's secret testing of drugs on unwitting citizens. He may have found the last of MK-Ultra, but as this goes on, MK-Ultra is just the tip of that iceberg. And the secret word is testing here, because Mr. Stanfield Turner, the head of the CIA, is right when they say they stopped the testing in the 60s, but then they began the distribution. There's only so much testing Jonas Salk did in the polio vaccine or in making Emprin or aspirins. You make your testing and then you put on the market and sell it and distribute it, or you give it away once you have the formula. The testing came in the 50s and 60s. That's true. They can say that under oath, but the distribution is still going on. Zodiac News Service quoted researcher Walter Boart as saying that reports that the CIA's MK-Ultra program, which uses drugs on unwitting citizens, was a minor operation compared to the agency's achievements with hypnosis and other behavior modification techniques. That sounds familiar, I think, for those of you that have kept up with these shows every week. Boart says he has learned from interviews with 18 former intelligence agents that the CIA's ability to use ultrasonic waves on the human brain could enable the agency to control behavior patterns of entire cities. That's important because I've said in San Francisco that I was told several years ago that there's 2 towers set up with waves to break meditation or control the mentality, and I cited examples and dates in Los Angeles of wires and intents of like telephone wires to affect the minds of people in Los Angeles. They are getting ready to change behavior patterns in entire cities. And I'm not even sure that they're not already using it. I don't think that this is telling the whole story. It was like the news about the neutron bomb and the funding of the neutron bomb 2 weeks ago. Then we found out 4 or 5 days later that they've already tested it in Las Vegas and made it. They're asking for funds for it, and they already have it made. I actually believe that this is being employed over certain cities right now, and I'll give you my reasons later. This researcher claims that the ultrasonic waves can lower the brain waves of a city's population to an alpha state, leaving the citizens susceptible to mass propaganda and hypnotic suggestion. And I do believe that this is already happening in the major cities in America already. Boart says he has interviewed a man who claims to have been a paid assassin for a government intelligence agency. This man told him of the use of hypnosis to program killers in this country was standard practice. Now, the alleged assassin said that hiring a killer was not usually difficult for an agency because most people could be induced to be, in quotes, patriotic, and that includes the hypnosis of Jack Ruby to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald because he was told it was patriotic. The assassin claimed that the agencies use hypnotic methods in most cases to erase the memory after the mission is accomplished and to avoid deathbed confessions later. Boart is publishing a book in the spring, which I'll be very anxious to get, called Operation Mind Control, and he says that MK-Ultra program was only part of a larger mind control program aimed at creating a psycho-civilized world. Now, I saw this happening. I moved up to Carmel. It's been 13 years, and it took us 2 years to sell the house before we moved up here. So that was 15 years ago that I wanted to get out of the city of Los Angeles. And I also said that I would never live in a major city in the world, anywhere, anytime again, that these things are happening. I also believe that it's happening over the television. The most intelligent people I know who have the clearest minds are not watching any television. People who are media freaks, some of my best friends like Flo Kennedy and Paul Krasner and Dick Gregory, and I can go on and on. Their minds are very clear about some things, and they are totally illogical about other things. They're just zombied out from the media, and I swear that the TV does have messages that you're going to find out years from now that are controlling behavior and minds, that are getting people to behave in a very calm way, not appropriate to what's going on, the news that's going on, and they are getting a form of hypnotism in watching the programming of the major shows. And I feel that one way to protect yourself, in addition to possible contamination in food, is to stay, if you can, out of the major cities, because I've been told for a long time, and I believe it's happening, that this mass propaganda, hypnotic suggestion, is not only coming over the television screen, but it's coming through these towers, specifically in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, I just take the West Coast papers, and I do take the New York Times and Washington Post, but I can't follow a lot of the things that are happening in the major cities around the country, of course, so I'm particularly close to California, and I know that these things have been tested and are being used in the state right now. Now, this new information about the CIA making zombies and testing people can be applied to articles I read all the time in everything I'm doing. Here's an article I brought in July 14th, 1977, the Los Angeles Times about Howard Hughes. Now, this doesn't make the Associated Press. It doesn't make the United Press. When there is an important news story, I've said over and over again, it doesn't come out. The court has subpoenaed Clarence Waldron, who has used Howard Hughes' name for forgery many times. They've also called Mr. Holmes, a high Hughes aide, to testify. These men want to take the fifth. They've objected to the depositions in court about supplying the narcotics for Howard Hughes. The latest report now is that he was getting 100 codeine and Valium a week, which is approximately 15 a day, and that there's a possibility that this man has been zonked out, that's the word in the Los Angeles Times, for 30 years. I know it's been 20 years, but 30 years would be 1946, and that would be the date of the plane crash in Los Angeles, and he was heavily doped after that. In 1947, he was able to go to a Senate committee and testify, but after that, Hughes became very irresponsible and then, of course, wasn't seen at all. The court have asked these gentlemen to sign depositions on the amount of drugs this man got. Here was a man in charge of the entire security of the United States, making our satellites, our communication systems, and more. And we can't find out the amount of drugs he took, how they were obtained, the capability of Hughes to think or reason with 100 Valium and codeine a week, the manner that they were taken, the injections or the ingestion. These men don't want to appear in court and tell about their client and read the logs about the amount of drugs he had, whether he was oriented even thinking at all, or whether he was a test case in which the major oil companies could take his oil bit and use it for their own profits, and then use his company to incorporate the CIA for assassination teams, and then combine it with organized crime and the mafia, and buy up Nevada, and then buy up the Supreme Court. There was a recent document that Howard Hughes had given approximately several $100,000 to John Mitchell and $30,000 fee to select the 3 justices of the Supreme Court, the last 3. And then you read in the news this week that the blacks have been set back 10 years in decisions of the court, and that the women's movement has been back 10 years, that every decision in favor of women has gone back 10 years. When you get a man or non-existent man, a bachelor in the Hughes empire, kept by 5 other bachelors and surrounded by men with no women, and cut off from all earthly experiences, who hates blacks, who hates women, who hates Jews, and who has the money to buy the Supreme Court, what kind of decisions do you expect? I would try to get the women's movement, including Flo and other women. I met Betty Friedan. We were both on the Mort Saul show together, and I was talking about conspiracies, and she doesn't believe in conspiracies. She's smart aleck. She doesn't care about conspiracies. Well, when the Supreme Court sets back the women's movement 10 years to a standstill, and a non-existent, zonked-out drug zombie selects the justices of the Supreme Court with unlimited money, where do they think the women's movement is going to go? How do you think it's going to survive? Or any movement involving the blacks, Chicanos, Indians, Jews, the minority, when you get a sexist, racist, fascist, using killer teams behind the umbrella of his loneliness or solitude, what do you expect? And certainly not a Shangri-La or a heaven or a utopia. So the people that I've warned about going into the drugging of these various people and the importance of opening up the Hughes organization have stayed off from that. And as Bertolt Brecht says, they'll pay their dues and wonder why, because when they add up what's hurting them, they're going to have to get back to the drugging of these people and the Hughes organization. Last week, a Senate panel, there was a Senate hearing where Martin Diamond testified. He's from the University of Northern Illinois, and he was objecting to the Jimmy Carter proposal that when you go to the poll, you vote directly that day, and that's it. A lot of people feel the ballots would be stuffed, that it's not a very good way to check out the voter registration. People could be using aliases and just walk in and vote all over town with false identification. This is a Rockefeller-Carter thing that they've cooked up for the next elections. So a particular witness, Martin Diamond, goes to testify Friday before a Senate panel, and while he's still sitting in the room, he drops dead. Was he killed chemically by the CIA? Was it a coincidence that he dropped dead? Was his opinion unpopular? How do we know, as long as the CIA has these chemicals that you hear about? There's another death in Washington, D.C. this last Friday. Lewis Dalton. It was his first week of work at the President's Commission on Mental Health. He's on Capitol Hill. He's assigned there to help work with the Committee on Mental Health in the United States. A couple of men walk up to him, and one says to him, "I'm going to shoot you right now. I'm going to kill you." And he shoots. Luckily, this person lived. He was wounded, almost died, and no one knows what to make of the incident. The Washington Post, July 17, 1977, says no one knows what to make. It's all strange. He didn't ask for any money. There was no explanation. There was no rationalization. He just walks up and says, "I'm going to kill you." I believe these are zombies being programmed under this hypnotic treatment to do these things. And that when time comes out, you'll find that they were in certain mental hospitals and they were in the service in Vietnam, and they're being tested so that you can erase people if you want to just walk up and not remember. The new articles about the CIA and the media have suggested, as I said, that the director, Stansfield Turner, appear next week in a closed session, July 29th, that's a couple of days from now, to testify about the drug material that's out now. And as I say, under oath, he can say that there are no more tests. But the point is that they are distributing these drugs, and they can distribute them through people like the ITT and the CIA and the Defense Industry Security Command and Navy Intelligence, or through the insurance salesman Clement Stone's agencies and local police and local FBI, and through Reverend Moon. There are thousands of conduits, or hundreds, or at least 50 good conduits to distribute the drugs that are now already tested, to put surreptitiously into people's drinks and food. The tests are over, so what good does it do to testify on that? But I can tell you that our CIA director is a liar, an outright liar, if he says they're not doing it now, because they are, and he should be removed from office. But of course he won't, because I think too many people are already zonked out to even put up a resistance to this kind of information. Senator Daniel Inouye, who's chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, wants to have hearings on these programs at an earliest date possible. I'm going to write to him this week and ask if I could testify on the information I have about these CIA programs, but I know it won't be allowed. The new information that John Marks had talks about these pharmaceutical firms and manufacturers distributed in 7 countries, this medication, 4 in the British Commonwealth, 4 in Latin American countries, in Japan and South Korea, and they've been used. We have been distributing these drugs around the world, and yet there's been studies that show that no other country than the United States ever tested prisoners. Only Nazi Germany tested these prisoners. We can distribute these drugs around the world to these various countries, but the studies show that there wasn't any other country except for Nazi Germany and the United States that has done this kind of work. Furthermore, I feel that this story that the prison testing was done is a total lie. I don't believe there was as much testing on prisoners as there are people out at large in the society. The point is that many people in prison are very astute. If their buddy goes into Vacaville and comes out zonked, they know it. If he goes in and has psychosurgery, they know it. If his food is poisoned, they know it because they're very close to the situation. And I know just from my correspondence with people in the California prisons, they can tell me when somebody's had the surgery or somebody's been had or there's poison in their food. But the point is that the CIA has used millions of dollars, many millions, the Army alone, 26 million, in their LSD testing, in addition to all these other institutions. And there weren't that many prisoners zonked out. They may be kept passive by some of this chemical that's in their food. But the hypnosis and the erasing of memory is more important to people doing current jobs now, such as hypnotizing a person to say that they're Arlene Grant when it's Candy Jones, or to say it's Howard Hughes when it's Vance Cooper. The real refinement of the drug testing program, the hypnosis, the electronic sound, and so forth, the real usefulness is in the political assassinations, because then these dumb little zombies who smile like Arthur Bremer and don't know how they got in the Waldorf Hotel or who paid their room or what they were doing there are useful to take a pot shot, say, at George Wallace and release 26 million votes that Richard Nixon needed for that election, the conservative votes that wouldn't go to George McGovern. John Marks of the CIA talked about techniques of mind bending and mind erasing, electroshock, radiation, psychosurgery, psychology, and incapacitating agents. Now, those techniques were brought out in the Senator Church Committee and the Rockefeller Committee a little bit. I've read them before on Dialogue Conspiracy. This program to manipulate people's minds was not just a defense against men being interrogated in Korea at the time of the Korean War. The Korean War was in the 50s, and it was in 1946 that the CIA made up their mind that they were going to alter human behavior, and that is consistent with the Dr. Delgado studies at Yale that were instigated by Navy intelligence. The CIA began in 1947 with their Operation Chatter, and then from 53 to 57, the Operation Bluebird or Artichoke that I've talked on KLRB. The MK Ultra and the MK Neoma were just a drop in the bucket. They were tested from 1953 to 1963, and those agencies that received this kind of medication that was used for the tests were many, many institutions. I've given their names on Dialogue Conspiracy, and if you write to me, I can send you the names of some of these schools that were used for testing in addition to the prisons. These hospitals and institutions that receive this kind of money for grants, the American Institute for Research, Armour, and the ITT Research, the Baylor University, Cornell, and Cincinnati, the University of California, Connecticut University, Delaware University, the FM Corporation, the Friends for Psychiatric Hospitals receive this money, Georgetown University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University. There's a list, Mississippi University, Oregon, where Gary Gilmore was. There's a whole list of institutions that receive this money, and if you send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, write to my home preferably, because I only get here once a week. The address is in the phone book, or KLRB, Box 3904, Carmel, California. I'll send you a list of some of the institutions where this federal money went. The mind control problem is the number one problem in the United States. I've stressed that over and over again, and I just can't be emphatic enough on Dialogue Conspiracy. I'm really afraid that as the information comes in, as the researchers bring you the truth and try desperately to bring you the truth, you won't even have the mental capacity to separate it anymore, because it will be through your food and through your television or the radiation over the major cities. People in small towns like Carmel can't rally that much effort, and the people in New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles can have their minds tranquilized on these kinds of situations. Well, the drug program will be in the news a lot. I hope the information that John Marks gets out will be published. We'll read this book on the mind operation that this Board is publishing. We'll be talking about, again, it is the major weapon that I fear desperately, and it is taking place. This is Mae Brussell. Another week's rolled by. I'll see you next week on Dialogue Conspiracy. And take it easy until next week. Keep your mind clear. That's the main thing.
There is a truth, I thought to myself, while driving down Route 68. The car in front is a Renault. It's not behind, it's not a Ford. There is a truth in how things happen. If it was yesterday, it wasn't 1894. And if tomorrow none of two come true, there'll be another truth in store. And those who think there is no truth, that all depends on point of view, will lock us up and fire the bomb made only for a gentleman to use. The president is just a choice. He should not incite or claim his fame. One November night I heard the screaming horns, and knew America had changed her name. We're not the same, you and I are not. You who call free thinkers enemies, you are clearly now the enemies. And we will do what we must do she must sing, and they must slave. You must have heard that we will never really rise again. The minds behind the plastic mules gave the word. They cannot just mow us down. It's they who are the arch anemic ones. Ours are free and tender girls. Ours are mountain climbing sons. So you and I, who disagree, truth exists but misery. I cry for you, I cry for us, as I prepare to leave the bus. There is a truth for you and me, to feast our